you see it?
No, it's okay.
Are you fellow or senior fellow?
I'm fellow.
Welcome back. We'll start with a presentation by Amrita Goldar, who is fellow at ICRIER, and she'll talk about the public health benefits of adaptation.
Yeah, I'll start. Very good morning, everybody. So my paper for this particular project related to disease and climate interactions. There was, at the start of it, we did some amount of climate modeling, getting downscale results for Surat, which we started out with, while we did the work for other cities as well. But this paper particularly uses the Surat case study and looks at how disease interactions can be costed in an illustrative exercise, and this can be replicated for other cities as well. Okay, this is the overview. Oops. Yeah, this is the overview of the presentation. I will be talking about Surat. I think in the interest of time, I can skip over it because previous presenters have talked about Surat. It's laid the spatial aspects of Surat in much detail, so I think I'll skip over that. What I'll emphasize more on will be the climate model results that we got and how these models were later on used for malaria prediction. So malaria, since it's a very endemic problem for Surat, we've taken malaria to be the case study, but similar models can be developed for other gastric diseases as well as other vector-borne diseases as well. And in the last part of it, I'll talk about the economic impact analysis of interventions. Oops. Okay, so this I'll quickly skip over. So, but something that I want to emphasize here is the fact that thankfully, even Surat has a very pleasant climate. In fact, I recall I had a talk with a health officer once at Surat, and he says that Surat has a very pleasant climate. That is why we all love it here. But unfortunately, that is why the mosquitoes also love us. So very pleasant climate, 20 to 30 degrees on an average, 60% relative humidity. It's located right on the beds of the Tapi River, which has, obviously you have a lot of still water due to flooding, etc. So you have stagnant water pools. So they're anthropogenic as well as natural causes, because of which malaria is a problem for the city. And at the bottom of the slide, if you look at the line there, so I've highlighted the different instances of different flood issues that are circled in blue, and you can see the fall in malaria cases that have happened. In fact, if you look at the first circle, which is 1994, when the first flood happened and the plague incidents happened, after that you see some amount of plateauing that is happening. So that is all can be attributed to the very stringent vector-borne disease control program within the city and its success. Okay, here this is a continuation of the earlier slide. So just to illustrate the different sort of activities that are being done by the Surat Municipal Corporation, and within that, the vector disease control cell within the SMC. So you have something very interesting happening within the city, where there is a 100% household surveillance system. Each household is visited at least once in a fortnight. So the officers there, the ground officers, go and ask, are you suffering from malaria? Have you had any sort of fever recently? They check, and if they come and there's some sort of follow-up that also happens to check if this is there, and they give or dispense medicines free of cost. In addition to it, there's a lot of other things also that are being done. So there are a lot of checks for stagnant water pools. So you have fogging and spraying that is done so that malaria doesn't breed. You have other instruments also that happen. Okay, so this is where it gets a bit complicated from here. So the problem that I think even Meenu talked about in her presentation is that the fact that when this paper was written, downscale climate models were very hard to come by. Now that after, if people are also do also work in climate models, know that after IPCC, the 5th assessment report, some improvements in data dissemination is there. But at the time that this was written, at least no work was being done where you had GCMs that were then downscaled to a climate, to a city level, and we had to therefore use data that was pre-existing by University of Cape Town, and they presented different results for different cities, and those models were used. In fact, you would also see that the concentration pathways, or the pathways that we are used for this work, is the stress scenarios that we are using, not the RCP ones. However, at ICRIER, we are right now working on it, and we are trying to get city level downscale results for the RCP scenarios as well, and maybe in future iterations of this paper or in other work, we'll use those results. But for this paper at least, the stress scenarios and A2 scenario is what we're looking at. And at the bottom of this slide, you'll see 6 different models that we used for getting a consolidated picture of what climate projections would look like for Surat. So we did not want to rely on just model, because the extremities that just choosing one model would introduce, we wanted to avoid that. So therefore, we are taking an average of 6 different models from different parts of the world. Okay, these are the results. I think in previous presentations, people have alluded to it. So essentially what this shows here is that you have increases in maximum temperatures that will happen. And something that I would want to bring your attention to would be the two graphs at the bottom of the slide. So here you see the precipitation patterns, how they would change from the current pattern to a futuristic pattern. You'll see that there will be more extremities that has been talked about, but even the months in which these happen will be lesser. So rather than it being a spread out thing, it will be happening at lesser months. And also something interesting is that the pattern also is changing. So if you talk to the city officials, they are very alert during the usual monsoon months of say June, July, August, early September. But then your rainfall pattern is also changing. So your cautiousness or the level of alertness of the governance systems and also even private individuals will have to shift focus to a separate sort of a time slice. Okay, so this is the econometric model that was used. So essentially using disease incidence statistics that were available from the Surat Municipal Corporation. So the Surat Municipal Corporation gives us malaria statistics of how the disease incidence was at different points in time. So modeling those and seeing how the climate interactions are going to be, we tried to forecast the disease incidence patterns and how they would change over the period of time. And just to do some sort of checks, if I can change the slides. Yeah, so if you can just see the graph here. Sorry, this is creating some problem. So as I said, changing seasonality of incidence. And if you just look at the predictions, so the ones in blue are the actual malaria cases that were there for the time period studied. So I had, if I recall correctly, the time period from 1995 to 2012 as the controlled time period. But if you look at the red lines, that is the change that will happen. So you see that for the usual mosquitogenic months of July to September, your disease incidence is reducing. But at the tail ends of it, so you have fresh cases in different months in which you would not ideally expect malaria to happen in. Okay, so this is at the heart of the paper. So after this malaria incidence was calculated about how the number of cases that would be there in different months for the city, the next part of the paper talks about how do you cost this burden of disease. So we have looked, so in fact there are various ways in which to couch it. Right now we have costs of interventions and benefits of intervention. So essentially, if the SMC has invested a lot of things in making the city better or at least malaria proof to an extent, what are the costs of such intervention and what are the benefits in terms of avoided morbidity loss, avoided malaria treatment costs, etc. But in other nomenclature, you can also put it down as reactionary adaptation cost and anticipatory adaptation. It's just how you term it. So essentially right now the paper talks about costs and benefits of intervention. Okay, so this is at the heart of what the results show us. So I would encourage you to read the paper when it comes out. But on the right-hand side, where you'll see the wage cost or wage loss avoided and the treatment cost avoided, these are essentially the benefits that we're talking about. So what we have essentially assumed is for the treatment cost avoided is that we have forecasted disease incidence levels for the city and assuming the fact that these cases get treated. So I don't know if people have a medical background here or not, but essentially there are two strains of malaria that can happen. So within Surat, there are P. vivax cases and P. falciparum cases. So what are the treatments that are given for each? And that has been taken. And then we have built in a sort of case where we've assumed that 50% of these cases go for private treatment and 50% go for public treatment. So that once put together gives us the treatment costs avoided. Second thing, which was a bit more nuanced than this, was estimating the wage loss avoided. So we had the total number of diseases, total number of cases of malaria reported, but then we had to estimate essentially what is the working age population. So we have taken some assumptions for it, and after working age population, we had to assume that people who are falling ill, what type of occupations do they belong to, and what sort of wage losses would they incur. So we have taken sources such as the NSSO Employment Unemployment Survey for the district as well as Annual Survey of Industries to get this sort of result out. And we have some proportions of, so essentially, even in fact, something that was alluded to by Meenu is that most of the workers within Surat belong to either the textiles or the diamond cutting businesses, or to a small extent the petrochemical business also within at a district level. So we had to estimate essentially the wage losses that would accrue because of this. So you see a total of I think 111 is the total that we get as the wage loss avoided. So these are the benefits of intervention. On the left-hand side, you see the costs. So the first, on the top corner, you see the public health program costs. These are taken from the annual reports of the department, but this needs to be updated. So this is for, if I recall correctly, I think it's for 2012 that we had, but this was something within the range of 40 to 50 lakh. And then the second thing was prevention cost also. This is something interesting that we found out. So essentially prevention cost is private costs that are being taken, incurred by households themselves. So NSSO Consumer Expenditure Survey reports many people within the Surat district using mosquito nets, using mosquito repellents all out, etc. So what are the costs that they are incurring and what is the sort of penetration of these sort of equipments? So those are also factored in. So this graph, in a sense, presents the numbers close to it. And you can see that while these numbers are not that large, I would say, but still these are significant enough. And through timely intervention and now through more proactive intervention, these can be avoided by the city. Oops, no. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. I hand over this, the podium to Sandeep Paul, who's a research associate at ICRIER.
Thank you, Amrita. So there have been a lot of Surat stories, and so I just take your attention a little bit away to another city that we looked into, the case of Kochi city. So here we are looking at the role of waterways in promoting the urban resilience in the Kochi city. So what we realized was, like as ma'am said in her presentation also, a city is climate secure just as its weakest link. So in terms of Kochi, coming to Kochi, water is the most important component in the city's geography, and the resilience measures has to start from there. And that has been the motivation behind this paper. So evidently, the battle on climate change is increasingly becoming local, and it has been explicitly mentioned everywhere, and I think it is universally accepted also. So issues very serious when it comes to coastal or riverine cities, which are more vulnerable to climate change than others. And in India, sadly, we have yet to have a more concentrated approach on water bodies as part of planning. And urban planning remains highly land-centric with very little acknowledgement for water bodies or wetlands. So Kochi, as you know, it's the largest city in Kerala and the second largest along India's western coastal line after Mumbai. And it is the fastest growing urban hubs in the country and forms part of a very rapidly growing contiguous urban region. So as you can see in this, this map shows water forms an important part of Kochi city's geography. It is situated right in with the coastal area, with Vembanad Lake and many rivers flowing into it. So confluence of, it has a very complex estuarine system to start with. And the city is rapidly growing. The city has witnessed a rapid population growth in the past 30 years. And when you see the average decadal growth, the Kochi Corporation, the decadal growth is not very high, but like when you compare it to the municipal areas and panchayats around it, they're having a much more rapid urban growth. So, but the entire region is very contiguous, and hence we cannot look at for anything, we cannot look at Kochi city alone, but we have to take it as a whole. And Kochi has a flat terrain in depth with canals and is flanked by backwaters. It is sloping from east to west with an average altitude that varies from 7.5 mean sea level in the eastern fringe to less than 1 meter on the western fringe. And it has characteristically a predominant of water sheets in its land utilization pattern. But what we have observed is that this water sheets, the land utilization has been changing over the period. The percentage share of area under this category was as high as 23.4% in 1981, but it's coming down significantly in the recent times. And many of the city canals have become victims of encroachment and neglect through silting, fly tipping, disposal of untreated waste, sewage. So basically, in a city which is crisscrossed by canals and sitting in a estuarine coastal system, these canals are not serving the very function, like any of the functions it's supposed to serve, be it the navigational purpose or the flood protection or the supporting the ecosystems, the economy of the ecosystems, or the ecologically also. So these functions are being compromised immensely. And when we looked at it from the transportation angle, Kochi has all 4 modes of transport. It is well connected with all other parts. It has a dominance of road network like any other cities, and has a broken gridiron pattern with emphasis on north-south accesses. The share of public transport has been declining in the recent past, with the share of private ownership of vehicles going up. So the city is like heavily clogged, and transportation is one of the major troubles Kochi is facing today. So at the same time, city is also witnessing a very rapid growth. A lot of new investments are coming up. City is having a lot of new investments, especially in terms of IT. IT said a new container terminal is coming up in Vellapadam. And so as a city, it's an employment hub. So here, if you look at it, the city attracts a lot of population from the nearby areas, but most of the so if you see, like it has this graph shows the work radius for the Kochi's working population, and the other graph shows the mode choice in commuting for work. So as you see, it's mostly driven by bus service, private transport, with very little share of public transport. Even the share of boats or the water transport is very less presently. And the city is now having a metro rail system. A new rail system came up last year, so 18 kilometers of the first phase of the metro system is already on. It is operational, so it is expected to change the way the city travels. But again, the transport by waterways, as we discuss in the subsequent sections, remain very marginal and limited. So this is the map of Kochi Metro, which is coming up in the first phase. Almost till Maharaja's College it is operational, and thus it is fast extending to other areas also. But one very good initiative that has came up recently is that the metro system is also planning a water metro project to integrate the waterways to its transport system. So we see that waterways has a very important function to play in the transport system of Kochis. It is an alternative or can feed into the present transport system and release a lot of pressure from cities' congested roadways. So although historically well endowed with canals and waterways, the popularity of water transport has declined over the time. At one point, it had more than 60 jetties in its backwaters and used to have an extensive ferry system. But over the time, there were a lot of new bridges constructed, the Gosri bridges, which came up in the last decade, completely shifted the mode choice from the water transport towards a road transport. So an earlier pre-feasibility study reported that over 2,200 daily bus departures happened from these islands on the western side to the main island, to the mainland. So if you actually see in this graph, we have plotted all the key employment hubs and how they are connecting towards the city. So if you really see, all the key employment hubs in the city are located near the waterfronts. And currently, it's connected with few bridges which are marked in these white circles. They are the main lines of transport which takes the working population from this western flanks, which is densely populated, towards the main urban land. So, as I said, the city has proposed a water metro project and is planning to implement an integrated water transport project with the financial assistance from the German bank KfW. So here, the water transport is sought as a feeder service towards metro. So the project is envisaging development of 16 identified routes connecting 10 islands along a network of routes that span 76 kilometers, and a lot of new latest model fast fuel efficient fleets of ferries are supposed to come in. And city is also expecting to have a unified metro transport authority, an umbrella transport agency, which would bring together all the transport modes together and to ease the decisions when it comes to dealing with the city transports. So this is the proposed phase 1 and 2 of the Kochi Water Metro projects. So as you can see, it's like it runs along the present routes itself, but on a more frequent and more efficient way. That is what they're planning, and already some boats have been, boats are functional, and it's partly getting functional, and it's expected to complete in 1 or 2 years. But when we looked at it, Kochi, and we were interested to see how other cities which have similar geography or has waterways as a very important component of their geography, how are they dealing with waterways development? Is it seen as an addition to the existing transport system? Here, the primary function is to assist the metro transport or the road transport, and the waterways transport is not the primary motive in itself. So when we looked at the other global examples, we realized that there are predominantly two types of approaches. The first and the most common approach, here the Indian waterways has developed as a means to boost the local economy and maximize the benefit. Here the economic agenda is the primary vantage point, and the environmental benefits are considered as the additional takeaways. So lower emissions, ecological protection, increased awareness about about environment among the public. All these are additional takeaways that comes once an economic agenda is set. The other approach is to have climate change and adaptation or environmental protection as the major theme for developing the waterways. So in most of the countries, the go-to option for bringing economic development to a specific region endowed with waterways is tourism. Some good examples in this respect would be the Castilla Channel development in Spain. So here, what happened was they capitalized on the economic aspects of tourism with a larger plan to recover the hydrological and environmental aspects of the Castilla Channel. The area is very sparsely populated, and there wasn't much private enterprise to start with. So the city governments, which is a very small town to start with, and they have authority over a very small part of the channel also, but they stepped up and brought in everybody else, and public-private initiatives were brought in as a solution for the lack of private enterprise. And similarly, another notable example could be Italy's Navigli Waterways in the Lombardy region, where again tourism was the main peg which brought public action in the first place. But again, there also a public-private initiative was there, where the city stepped back and allowed the private enterprises to exploit the local canals through a defined natural, local and sustainable tourist system. And other than tourism, another vantage points many cities have explored is the freight transport. Sweden is a very good example where they encouraged investing in water freight movement in and around the Lake Vänern area, where most of the freight movement was earlier dominated by road transport. If we go to the other approach, where environmental protection and climate change is the major theme for development, two most talked about examples is one from the Netherlands, the Room of River program, and the other would be the Ireland. In the Room of River program, which is again much talked in the context of Kochi and Kerala already in many of the literature, here the cities and the communities along the river and waterways made safer and resilient to heavy water discharge from upstreams or in case of high precipitation. So here flood mitigation was the primary purpose for which they prioritized their actions. So for that, they accommodated high water flow and dealt with water levels, dikes were relocated, depths of water were increased. So making room for the river allows the landscapes along the rivers to be restored in order to act as natural water sponges. In Ireland case, the government set up the good ecological potential framework for the development of waterways, and that has gradually led to the development of waterways and navigation also. So what we are arguing is that waterways is very much integral for increased resilience of the Kochi city. Kochi is highly susceptible to climate change, and it's been proven beyond doubt that Kochi, major threats are expected in Kochi in terms of sea level, temperature, precipitation patterns, etc. But unplanned development, indiscriminate discharge of waste and effluents by industries, lack of scientific waste management, especially solid waste, presence of low-lying islands, etc., are making the water systems in the city very, very vulnerable to climate change. So far, Kochi has considered and utilized waterways as part of its network for stormwater drainage and dumping wastewater. Water navigation remains underutilized. It's been always there, but even people from the islands doesn't use it much, even though there are clear advantages in terms of time saved and all, because the system was in a very bad situation. It takes a lot of time, bad frequency, all the issues. So learnings from a lot of global best practices can be adopted in the Kochi's case. For example, the Room of River in the Netherlands, it's very similar to the threats Kochi faces. Here again, it's a confluence region for many rivers coming in, and there's a need to identify these water bodies as natural sponges. And in the recent Kerala flood example, in a way, kinds of proves the point again that you have to, in a way, live with the water, and it should not be seen as just a transport system alone. So, and even if you, for the public motivation itself, the water transport system, it brings in a lot of advantages. So, water transport system would incur lower cost of development and management compared to the road systems. Estimates indicate that cost of establishing inland waterways are only 5 to 10% of a 4-lane highway, and the maintenance cost is much less. And also, it is important, it is advantageous not only from an adaptation point of view, but also from a mitigation point of view also. Even by very conservative estimates, official estimates itself, like implementation of ferry services in just 5 major routes can lead to an emission savings to the tune of 7,500 tons of CO2 annually. So, and on the economic side, Kochi has a potential for serving as the principal node for hinterland connectivity through the inland waterways. The national waterways runs through this Kochi waters, but it's not utilized well. A little bit freight transport happens from the ports towards the city, few industries use it, but it's highly underutilized. So inter-district transport within Kerala through this national waterways, Kochi can be a principal node. And NATPAC reports that development of Cochin port and hinterland connectivity can bring in an annual economic benefit of over 442 crores, in addition to several other tangible and intangible benefits. Moreover, this revitalization of waterways in Kochi could also contribute to strengthening of its social and economic resilience. So here again, going back to the point ma'am made earlier in her presentation, the weakest link in the Kochi city, the most vulnerable population are from the western islands. That is the place where the people from the fishermen community or the lower strata of the population, the lower income strata of the population lives. So an efficient and integrated water transport system could provide an affordable public transport to these communities, which are also as the most economically vulnerable in the cities, and provide them better access to economic opportunities, employment, health, and social facilities. It also holds a great potential for the tourism industry in the city, which is already a favored tourist destination. And the time is very ripe, and the Water Metro project also has come up at the right time, considering that city is witnessing a socio-cultural revival with initiatives like Kochi Muziris Binale. And from a disaster management and disaster risk reduction also, as I mentioned, these water bodies are very important for the city. The current set of risks and vulnerabilities faced by Kochi with respect to its water systems have been faced by local governments across the globe, including the developing countries. As we saw, all the notable examples adopted by the public institutions in collaboration with private stakeholders to overcome such risks. They revitalize the waterways by building larger economic and environmental programs around them. These programs have not only improved the quality of respective waterways, but also increased the region's economic and social resilience. So the multiple core benefits that the restoration of waterways can bring in, I'm not sure how well the city administration has acknowledged it. The Water Metro project is happening. There are a lot of other projects which is going on to restore these tourism industry or the traditional communities in these western islands to improve their economic potential, tourism potential. All these activities are going in, but it is faced by a lot of limitations and challenges. The major challenges comes from the institutional limitations itself. A range of agencies have jurisdiction over various aspects of water transport system, overlap of governance, proliferance of parastatal agencies, like that's one of the major problems Kochi is facing. KMRL, the Metro Rail Authority, which is leading the Water Metro project, is not in charge of restoration of the islands or like the tourism projects or the livelihood projects that's going on. So how well they can integrate with the other wings, the other departments. The Kochi Municipal Corporation also, as some of our studies shows, have very little authority and responsibility over many of the key functions that you expect from an urban local body. So these are institutional limitations which could hamper the ongoing initiatives in the Cochin city. Then there are network limitations. Transport can't be the only vantage points around which waterways development can happen, because the eastern front, where the most of the growth in the city is happening, there's a lack of permeability within the urban fabric. The canals there are very small, and proper transport network towards eastern front may not be possible. So there, the main thrust point might have to be different from connectivity to maybe recreational purposes or tourism purposes. But again, these are network limitations also exist in the city. Then of course there are ecological limitations.